Hi there, welcome back to my channel. I hope you're having a wonderful day today. Now, it has been a while since I've done this style of video on my channel. In May, I had recorded my May monthly wrap up and I lost all the footage. It all got corrupted and I just didn't want to refilm it. And so this month, I have decided to do a wrap up of June and July reading. So just to make this a little bit easier, I'm going to be splitting up June and July into two separate parts in this video. So I'll be talking about June first and I'll give you June's stats. I'll talk about June's books and then I will give you July's stats and talk about July's books. So for the month of June, I started off the month not very well because I ended up getting sick, and it was sort of the sickness where I just could not see anything, so I couldn't read and I didn't really want to lay there and listen to any books, so I basically spent the whole time just watching Bones and catching up on TV and all of that. So I didn't start reading properly until like middle of the month, and I only ended up reading 3 books in the whole month of June. So all up, those 3 books equaled out to 1,724 pages, and my average rating for that month was 3.5 stars. So without further talking into it, let me go through the books that I read in June. So the first book that I read in June was Diabound by Sable Sorensen. So this is written by 2 authors and together their name is Sable Sorensen. So this basically follows Marion Cooper, who works by day and fights by night to help support her mother and her sister and their little family to survive. But when her younger sister gets taken by nabbers, she signs up for the army to get to the front lines so she can try and find her sister. Little does she know she's timed this really well with the bonding trials. So she signs up for the army and she gets pulled into this trial that she has no choice but to do, to climb this mountain and bond with a dire wolf. And if she doesn't get chosen, she'll just go to the front lines of the army. So this is what she intends. But what she doesn't intend for when she gets to the top of that mountain, that she is forced into a bond with a dire wolf. And she's forced to stay at the palace to train with this dire wolf because they cannot be separated now. So she basically says to herself that she's going to endure everything that she can so that she can get to her sister as soon as possible. I have seen this book compared to Game of Thrones and Hunger Games. I disagree completely with those statements. The only connection it has with Game of Thrones is the dire wolves. It stops there. That is as far as it goes. In my opinion, it's better to compare it to Fourth Wing. It's like Fourth Wing but with dire wolves instead of dragons. But in saying that, it did not do the things that it should have done to be at the level of Fourth Wing. Now, my main issue with this book was that there was one character that was there from the start that was literally like looking through a glass wall into his brain. You knew exactly what his intentions were. The main character did not. You knew exactly what he was going to turn out like. The main character did not. She was oblivious, but we knew. So it was almost like I was yelling at this book that he's a horrible person. Why are you with him? Why are you seeing this about him? Why aren't you like seeing these things that are clearly red flags? And it just made me so angry and frustrated while reading it that unfortunately it did pull the book down quite a bit for me. Also, if I hear the nickname kitten one more time, I might explode. He called her kitten through the whole book, and it just got to a point where every time I read the word kitten, I just got so angry while I was reading it. If we put aside that character, I could see the building blocks that this book was trying to be as she's uncovering the lore, and she's got this slow burn romance with this guy, and just the addictiveness of that slow burn and finding out all the lore about this world and finding out new things. So she is learning as we are learning. But I think there was just something missing. And it also could have been that there was just too much of this other character that I did not like. Now, I will have to say, I did not predict every plot twist that happened in this book, but I predicted the main ones. And it was because that one character was so transparent that I predicted a lot of it. as you go along, you learn that it's a style of book that is basically pointing big red arrows at things like, pay attention to this, make sure you're remembering this because this is going to be vital later. And it was almost too obvious. I do intend on continuing the series because as much as this book was a 3 stars for me, I can see it expanding, and I can also see that in the second book, the character that irritated me in this book and the reasons he irritated me in this book is not going to be the same in the second book. I feel like it's going to be so much better in the second book. Now, there was a plot twist at the end of this book that made me think about whether it's just a cop-out or whether it's actually going to be vital to the book. So I am intrigued to continue for that reason, and I hope I remember by the time the second book comes out next year that I did want to continue it. But until then, I'm just sort of left with what this book had the ability to be and what it didn't reach. And I am not saying it as this is a bad book by any means. This is a good book that was ruined by a bad character. And it wasn't the main character. So it is easy to look past that character and understand what the book is meant to be about. And I did enjoy the main character's journey. I definitely felt the things that she was feeling, but I just wanted to bang her head against the wall and say, why aren't you seeing these things happening? So 3-star, middle of the range rating for me. It just didn't do anything amazing, and it didn't fix things that I think needed fixing. So hopefully the second book's better, but they are my thoughts on the first book, at least what I can remember, because half the book I can remember and I want to expand on. Half the book was very forgettable, and there were parts in there that I only remember because I was so frustrated with that one character. So hopefully he is not portrayed that way in the next book. Hopefully she's not as clueless in the next book. We will just see what happens as we continue the series. The second book I read in June was Holding the Reins by Paisley Hope. So this is my first foray into Paisley Hope's books. So let me go into the synopsis of this one. This is basically following Cece Ashby, and she's just moves back to her hometown after escaping a toxic relationship with a cheating ex. And she's moved back into her small town that she grew up in, and she's looking for a job. Now we've got the main love interest, Nash Carter, who is jumping at the chance to have her work for him and help him organize his business better. So he owns like an ice rink where he teaches children how to play hockey, and they have like ice skating and everything there and an instructor for that. And they're sort of having a little bit of trouble with the funding, and they need to organize a better way to make money. And so they hire her, but he is sort of fighting with the fact that he has to remain professional with the woman that he's grown up knowing and grown up loving. So this book definitely gave me hope for cowboy / small town romances. After my experience with Elsie Silver's Chestnut Springs series and the first book in that series, I did not have high hopes for a good cowboy romance. But this book exceeded my expectations for that trope. And I genuinely had such a great time reading this book, and it has definitely changed my perspective on this sort of category of romance. I do have to say though that as much as it is better than the other book that I read, it did have its downfalls. There were things that did irritate me during the book. For example, the smut scenes were very cringy at certain circumstances, especially in the respect of the male anatomy being so big and ginormous, which is not realistically something that I read in a normal romance. That's something that I would expect to read in a fantasy, because it is a fantasy that, oh no, he's so big. I will respect that she was in a relationship with someone else before that, and maybe he wasn't well endowed, and maybe this guy was, but she repeated it so many times that I just had to breathe for a second and then continue reading. In saying that, I did enjoy that the element of the hockey rink and owning a hockey rink and doing a fundraiser for that hockey rink to get more money in, I did enjoy that it wasn't just put into the background. It was definitely at the forefront in the majority of the book, and it was the main thing that they were aiming towards. I honestly have had, you will find out in this video, I've had such an on and off experience with books not doing what they've promised. So if you're promising me a romance that incorporates something like a sport or a business or whatever, I don't just want smut. I want to know about that business. I want to know what they're doing. I'm really intrigued to know what their day-to-day life is when they're not together. I honestly think that that was done well in this book. It could have had more, I will admit, because once we started getting the smut scenes, it was hard to stop the smut scenes, which is a recurring theme in romance books for me lately that I've been reading. So I do understand that, but it did do it a lot better than a lot of other books that I have read recently and other books in this series, which you will find out later. I did want more of the family elements, but that could be me being a little bit too greedy, because it definitely had the family elements and the family backstory and the main characters bonding over their parents who had passed away was done in a very respectful manner for the grief that they were feeling and the grief that they're going through, and the characters sort of expressing to themselves and each other what their true feelings are, even after all their trauma of this grief and the trauma of past relationships and things like that. I did appreciate that it was respectful in that sort of idea of it. I did like that the family elements of this and the family's incorporation in the story did shine a better light on how important family is to both of these characters. And that was done really well. I wanted more, but that is also me being greedy. And I honestly think it did have enough in it to be good. And I will say that this is definitely my gateway drug into this author. Not necessarily into the cowboy romances, because we'll have to see if other authors do the same thing for me. But this author definitely. I believe I have one more book in the series that hasn't come out yet that I can buy when it comes out. And then she's going into a motorcycle gang sort of series. So this is definitely my gateway drug into her books. She's done very well. I have such a great time with her books, and I can't wait to read more of them. The last book I read in June is a bit of a doozy. I read Fearless by Lauren Roberts. Now, there isn't much I can say about this book because it is the last book in a series, but the first book is in a world where being powerless in this city is a death sentence. So we're following Peyton Gray, who is a powerless person, and she is pretending that she has psychic abilities to survive. And she gets unwittingly added into these trials at the palace without her consent. She's just put on the list, and she's forced to go through these trials in front of the public eye and survive them, basically. I've talked about this series and my experience with it in depth in episode 6 of the Rainbow Challenge on my channel, so I don't feel the need to go into as much depth here. And if you want to know what my entire true thoughts on this series are, I recommend going to watch that video and listening to what I have to say in that, because I definitely went into more depth and I said everything I had to say about this series. But I'm going to briefly go over this series so you understand the context before I go into what I thought of this book. So the first book in this series was a 5-star. The chemistry and the angst and the emotions throughout this book and the danger had me in a chokehold, and it was honestly to die for. Without smut, it did the chemistry so well, and the banter was amazing, and I loved that book so much. Then I read the novella, and the novella Powerful happened at the same time as Powerless. So when I came across a huge inconsistency in the plot and a scene that was completely different to what happened in the first book, I did get frustrated, and the novella was basically just to introduce a character, which I'll go into a little bit later. Then I got to the second book. The second book in the series was lackluster, had no plot, had no reason to be there, in my opinion. It could have been a shorter book. It could have been combined with a novella. It could have been combined with the first book. It basically was there for a cliffhanger ending and nothing else. She said it was a filler book, the author, and it really, truly felt like a filler book with no substance. You can have filler books with plot. This one did not have plot. And then finally, we come to the third book, which is the one I read during June. And I, to say the least, was so utterly disappointed in this book that it made the whole series irredeemable in my eyes. For a start, this book had nothing happening. When the dangerous scenes happened, they happened so quickly that it was almost like I was getting whiplash, and I was like, wait, what just happened? And I'd have to reread it because it was only like a couple of paragraphs, maybe a page long, and we're meant to think that she's in danger and her life is at risk and things are happening and oh my God, but it happened too quickly. And then we're back to the monotonous, boring parts of the book. When I'm going into the male character that was introduced in the novella and was, in my opinion, the whole reason for that novella, I hated how disrespected that character was. So when he was introduced, he had an ability that would have been threatening to one of the other characters, and it would have made such a huge, angsty sort of violence to the book. It would have given it some substance that was irresistible and addictive. But they did him so dirty. I honestly am just pissed off that he was just a filler character by the end. And I don't think it's much of a spoiler. Other people will. But he was literally in 2 scenes in this book, and both of them you didn't get much of him at all. It was like 5 seconds, and all of a sudden he's just gone. And I don't think it's a spoiler because he didn't have that much impact on the story. There was no reason for him to be in the story in the first place. And that pulls me to the fact that it seems like this last book, or the last 2 books, were disconnected from the first book. They did not seem like they would have had the same ending. The book that I finished, Fearless, just did not end the same way as it would have if the first book was what we were going off. It was almost like there were 2 different authors. I don't know. I think it was honestly because the first book got so popular so quickly. And I honestly am sick of publishers rushing an author to write a book just because their first book was popular. They're rushing them, and then the book is not the same level. It's happened with so many other series. It happened with Sarah J. Maas in her last trilogy she brought out. People are being rushed to write things, and they need to take the time to finesse it. The first 3 books in the series, I'm pretty sure, came out in 1 year. And the last book, the one that I just read in June, came out the year after. It just had nothing. It had nothing. I'm quite angry at the tangled web that happened at the end of this book. And it was sort of set up in chapters. And as I was reading, I'm like, they better not finish this book with this. This better not be the plot twist ending. And it was. It was explained away that made it make more sense. But the plot twist, oh my God, how could they have done this? That happens. I predicted it halfway through the book. Maybe not even then. Maybe a bit earlier. And it just wasn't. It wasn't what I wanted. And it wasn't what was set up for this series to end like. And there were dangerous things set up in this book that was almost like we were trying to rush the very end of the book, even with things we've introduced in the book. And something really dangerous was set up that I was like, oh no, how's that going to end up? Because like, that doesn't make any sense. Oh, this couldn't end like this. It's going to expand into the other kingdoms. And then it just got brushed off and forgotten about. Now, I'm not going to go too much further into this book because I'm so pissed off with the way that this series crashed and burnt that it was just disrespectful and disappointing. So much so that I threw the book across the room when I finished it. And I've since sold the book series to someone who will hopefully enjoy it more. And it's now off my shelf. I don't want to look at it. I loved the first book. I don't want to look at that series. And I am not going to read the last novella, Fearful, because I've since read what the Fearful one is about. And it makes no sense. And it's just to add a little extra pizzazz. And it's nothing to do with the plot of the story. And there's no reason. The only thing it links to is the king in the last book. And I understand that it explains something that happens to the king, but the last book explained it enough. I don't need to expand on that. So I am done, at least with this series for this author. If this author writes books in the future and a lot of people talk about them really highly, I might read it. Also because I know her first book's pretty good. The rest of the series, though, did not do well at all. So that's all I'm going to say on this book. Again, if you want more of my deep thoughts on this book, go to my episode 6 of the Rainbow Challenge, where I go really in depth with it. And I probably have more cohesive thoughts because honestly, I just need time to calm down, I think, and move on. And I'm hoping that soon publishers understand not to rush authors, because this is what happens when you rush authors. You don't get the same result as you got in the first book. And I need them to learn that quickly because it's happening with a lot of different books now and it's not okay. Okay, moving on, a little bit calmer now. We're going into the books that I read in July. So in July, I read a total of 6 books, which was a total of 2,119 pages. And my average rating, unfortunately, was a 2.92. So let me get into the books that I read in July. So I started off July with Where There's Smoke by Jodi Picoult. I definitely set myself up for failure here. So I rated this book a 1.5 stars. It's a short 40-page novella and it's sort of setting up for a series. I'm new to Jodi Picoult. I think that honestly, I don't like that she's starting her series with like 40-page novellas. I don't know if this is the only one she's done. From what I've heard, this is not the first time she's done it, but this is just a short 40-page book about a woman with psychic abilities, and she's like famous. Like she has her own show where she helps people connect with their deceased relatives or friends, and then the fame starts to compromise her psychic abilities and there's this big sort of controversy that happens. I honestly think that instead of this being a novella, it could have been the prologue in the first book. I think that would have done a lot better for it. It introduced what it needed to introduce, but it ended so abruptly that it was almost like I crashed into a wall and then the audiobook stopped and I was like, okay. I guess we're done. I think that her short stories are not the best way to consume her content. I think that her series in this might be more intriguing, but all in all, I probably won't continue the series because this is just like a quick read that I saw at my library and I thought, oh, that'd be great. And it just didn't work out for me. So I don't have many thoughts on it, but yeah, 1.5 stars is where I have it at. And that's really all I can say about this book. The next book I read in July was A Fire in the Sky by Sophie Jordan. I rated this book 3.5 stars. So this book is basically following the royal whipping girl. And so she gets punishments instead of the princesses. So she gets punishments for the princesses to punish them. And that's basically her life. And a border lord comes in for a visit and he requests to marry one of the princesses. The king sort of agrees because the border lord wants a voice in the council. But what he doesn't know is that the king has his adoptive daughter, the whipping girl, and he has chosen her to marry him. I will start by saying that this book fit into the trope that I've been looking for in a lot of books that is typically done too juvenile or fan fiction like in a lot of books, and that is dragon shifters. I appreciated too that the dragon shifters are built on a world that's not just about the dragons. I think that might have helped it along a bit. It's more that there's magic, and magic is believed to be eradicated, but you can't truly eradicate magic, and it will always come back one way or another. It's destined to be there. And I loved that element of it, and I loved that it was the building blocks for so many things in this book. And I think honestly that concept of it made this book a lot better than it would have been otherwise. The main female character's journey into rediscovering herself and who she is without the restraints of being emotionally dragged down by being the whipping girl, and the emotional gaslighting that she had and manipulation that she had to believe that was all she was worth for. And her sort of journey into coming out of her cocoon into a butterfly and rediscovering who she is and what her thoughts of the world should be and her idea of what her life should be from here on out. It sort of made you root for the character and made you hold on to her as she went through these experiences and you experienced them with her. And I honestly think that without this character also, the book may not have been as good as it was. So the main male character at the start, I could tell that he was a good person. And I could tell that he wasn't what she had been told that he was. But a lot of his dialogue at the start was good. As he developed along the book, he started to get more lackluster and he started to become bland and not like himself, not like how he was introduced. He was a completely different person. And then we got a glimpse of him again. And it was like, oh yeah, there he is. And then we lost him again. I feel like he was unfairly written in that respect, like he was an afterthought to the main character. And that would have been okay, but we had both their perspectives. We didn't just have hers, we had his as well. And the fact that he was quite bland in his perspectives in the middle of it and closer to the end of it was unexpected for me in reality. I wanted more for that ending and I felt it had the room to add more to the ending. But it's almost like she wanted it to be a cliffhanger, but the cliffhanger wasn't written correctly. And it was like we just dropped off into a brick wall and it just stopped abruptly, which was quite shocking with the way the story was going. So, you know, even noticing a lot of these things that were wrong with it, I did have a good time and I was enjoying my reading experience. It wasn't like a chore to get through. I did like what was happening. So I probably will continue in the series just to see how it goes. I don't know if I will buy the second book as a physical though. Maybe I'll have access to it another way, but we'll see. I currently don't know if I'm going to keep the book on my shelf either. I think I'm going to wait for the sequel and how that goes to see if I do keep it, because I do want my bookshelves to kind of have books that I'm proud of being on there. And I actually have good things to say about them. Like, I know I can see the potential in this book and in this series. I think it's just a fun time. And it's not the best writing, don't get me wrong. It is not the best writing at all. It's just a fun, silly, wacky time. And I do think I will continue in the series because of that. And hopefully it does get better from here. The next book I read was Coming in Hot by Josie Juniper. And I received the audiobook as an ARC copy for this book. So basically our main character Natalia has like 10 years experience in journalism and has just landed a job as a reporter for the Auto Racing Journal. But the night before she starts her job, she meets a handsome stranger and she has a one-night stand. And it turns out that this stranger that she had the one-night stand with is the Emerald team principal. Neither of them can forget that night, and the heat between them sort of threatens to burn them both alive. But what happens when a scandal threatens to shatter the perfect image they currently have? Before I sort of start getting into this book, I need to let you know that it is part of a series, the Frontrunners series, and this is the second book in the series. I have not read the first book, but I did sort of look into it and find out that I didn't need the first book necessarily to read the second book. So I do understand that there is a character in this book that I probably would have understood better if I had read the first one, but it wasn't really necessary for this one's plot line, and she didn't really show up a heap in this one's plotline anyway for it to matter as much to me. Now, I'm normally all for a Formula One romance. It's actually my go-to sports romance. And I usually like hearing about the cars and the vehicles and the business of Formula One and like traveling and all the intricacies of it. I think is really intriguing. I think that's why I like it so much. And reading from the perspective of a reporter for the Formula One sort of like a racing journal, I thought it would have done a better job at it. The problem is this was severely lacking in that department. So much so that I almost lost track of it completely when I was listening to it. And when you're losing track of racing being a part of it, when you're reading a book about racing and about a principle of a racing team and someone doing a racing journal, it is a lot more to sort of think about. I think a lot of the drama that happened in this book was so out of left field that it didn't make any sense to me. And I know that this is meant to be a fan fiction based on an Austrian Formula One racer, or like someone that owns one of the, like he's a principal for one of the companies. I don't know anything about this specific person, and I don't know whether this drama happens to him and that's why it's put in this book. I don't know whether it's connected to like real life stuff that's happened, but it didn't make sense if it's just for this book. If it's just like put in there for no reason, it does not make sense at all. Also, every character in this book in their own separate ways were toxic as. The best friend character, toxic. Literally the main love interests, both toxic for each other. They did not match each other at all. They are not what you would class as the perfect pairing. They just butted heads. Like, you'd have moments where they were like all lovey-dovey and it was great and the chemistry was good. And then they would butt heads and then they'd be childish about it almost. And it just kept repeating that. I feel like it's just a bunch of toxic characters, but it's not written in a way that you understand the toxic characters. They're just toxic. It was just sort of like the drama was ping-ponging me around the book. Unbelievably, the best part about it was the spicy scenes. I honestly think because he was so respectful. But it was almost like we wrote it so we could write these scenes, and we wrote a plot around it that was meant to be drama, but it didn't fit. It's almost like they came from two separate books. And I understand a toxic relationship sometimes happening, and then they sort of get better as the book goes along, and it ends up in a spot where at the end you're like, oh, okay, they suit each other. I don't think they suited each other by the end. I think it just didn't work out for me in that respect. I didn't like the cop-out ending that happened to make them be together. I didn't appreciate it really at all. I can't really say what happened because that's a bit of a spoiler. All in all, I didn't agree with the chemistry and just didn't meld with the story well with the concept that it's coming from a Formula One standpoint. I didn't think it was good necessarily. When I'm thinking about the fact that I received an ARC copy of an audiobook though, the audiobook was good in the way that the female character had a female voice and the male character had a male voice. There was a duet sort of perspective. But the problem is, the Austrian character, the main male character, he has an accent when he is speaking, like when his character dialogue is speaking. But the person voicing the character is very strong British. And so it threw me off a little bit at the start. Now, thinking about it more, I do understand that concept of that, making it more understandable for the reader. But when his Austrian accent came out, it was still understandable. So I don't know. It could have been better to understand for the majority of people when it was British actor. It just seemed like it was a little bit shocking to me at the time. So yeah, ultimately, I wish there was more Formula One in this book. I wish that it wasn't as toxic, but I have read toxic characters before in books and have been fine with the ending and good with the book. So I don't think that was it for me. I think it just didn't hit the mark for me, and it wasn't what I thought it would be ultimately. So it ended up being a 2.5 stars in the end. The next book I read was Spark of the Everflame by Penn Cole. And I acknowledged when I started reading this that I was meant to read it as a buddy read with a friend. And I completely forgot about that and read it anyway. And I'm stuck in a bit of a hole now that I'm trying to dig myself out of because of that. This is basically set in a world where you have humans and descended. And Descended are basically the offspring of humans and gods, and they have magical abilities. So this book sort of starts off with our main character witnessing her mortal mother talking to a Descended, and that night her mother goes missing. So 6 months after this happens, after her mother disappears, DM, the character, is continuing her job as a healer, and she comes across the Descended that she saw talking with her mother. And now she wants to know what he really knows about her disappearance, and she's sort of battling with herself on her morals and what is right and what is wrong throughout this whole book. So in this book, there are 9 different kingdoms, and each kingdom has their own form of magic. They've got like 2 magics in each kingdom, and I find that quite interesting. It does make it easier to understand where certain characters are from, and I sort of only delved into 2 of the kingdoms in this book, so I'm hoping, but it probably will expand into more of them as the books go on in the series. And I'm wondering when the gods will come back into the picture, because they honestly aren't in the picture at the moment, but it'd be really interesting to see what's happening in the background in that respect as well. I especially liked in this book that not everything comes so easy to the main character. Like, she struggles with things, and she struggles with herself and her identity and what her morals are and what's right or wrong, and discover who she really wants to be in this world mixed with tyranny and rebellion. And I especially like that she actually made mistakes along the way, and the mistakes actually impacted things, and she had to like refresh what she was doing and like try and correct what she had done. And that's really refreshing for me, because in fantasy books that I've been reading, they find it like they get to things so easy. Like, they already start off knowing how to fight, and she sort of does too, but she still learns. But it's almost like things come too easy to other characters in other books that I've read. Almost like we want it to have already started with this development so that we can get to the point that we're reading the book for. And it feels almost rushed in that respect. But this one, I appreciated that she actually struggled with it. I've seen a lot of people review this book and go, oh, she was so whiny, and oh my God, how could she not know what's right and wrong? But I liked her journey, discovering what's right and wrong for herself and making mistakes along the way, like I said, because it honestly made her character development so much easier to understand, and it's more satisfying almost, knowing that she's gone through all these things to be the person that she becomes at the end of the series. Even though a lot of the book was predictable, it was such an enjoyable read that I just was having such a good time. And it sort of shows that it's such a wonderful stepping stone into such an epic fantasy series that this looks like it's going to be. Now, I can't continue on the second book until my friend catches up, and then we can buddy read it together. But if that wasn't the case, for sure, I would be annihilating this series and really binge reading this series. I think that the next book has a high potential to be a 5-star. This book was a 4-star because I can see that something was lacking. And I couldn't quite pinpoint what was lacking, but it could be a little substance with other characters, I think. Because I think the main character had the substance that she needed. I think other characters might have needed extra, or maybe she needed to go through something big to expand on that a little bit more. So I can see how the next book might be a 5-star, whereas this one's a 4. And I can see it getting better. And I have heard things that people have said about the second book being so much better than the first book. If this book is the building blocks towards that, I am very satisfied and very happy, because the last thing I want is something like the Powerless trilogy, where the first book is fantastic and the rest of the series just dissipates off into nothing. So I'm very happy with that. I'm very excited for the rest of this book. And I also love how this book ended and how you're not going to know what's going to happen next. And it's really intriguing to try and find that stuff out. So until I get to the next ones, that's the only book I've read in this series, and I'm going to wait for my friend, probably to get back from Europe, and hopefully we'll read it together. The next book I read was the second book in the Silver Pines series, which is Training the Heart by Paisley Hope. Now, this is the one I was most looking forward to, so let me sort of tell you a little bit about it. So basically, Ivy Spencer starts a new job at the Ashby Ranch, and she sort of starts this job after she's escaped her manipulative boyfriend and that relationship. and she's now starting a job here. Meanwhile, while she's starting this job, the man that runs the ranch that has hired her, Wade Ashby, has different views on how to train a horse than she does, and is not sure about this newcomer to their ranch, especially when he feels constantly like there's a weight on his shoulders to improve on or impress his father who'd passed away. But it doesn't take long until they're stealing glances across the training yard at each other. The characters in this book I loved so much more. So I love that they're not one-dimensional and they understood each other. So there was no miscommunication happening. And if anything that was miscommunicated happened, it wasn't demanded that it was solved. It was almost like the character that wasn't communicating realized that she needed to communicate in order for things to progress and for things to happen and to understand other people in this book. And I appreciated that it actually had a good way to get through a lot of the problems that were happening. I think the fact that the two characters had similar past relationships really helped with them understanding each other, and that did definitely help with the communication between them. I really related to the main female character especially because we're both clumsy. We both think of the world the same way and overthink certain things that shouldn't be overthought, and I honestly related to her so much. And the journey that she's on because of her past experiences is just so realistic to me. I also think that the grumpy sunshine trope in this book is almost perfection compared to other things that I've read. I haven't read a heap of them. I say that. I've read a lot of enemies to lovers. I haven't read a lot of grumpy sunshine romance books, I should say. But the problem is that as much as I liked their relationship, the spicy scenes I enjoyed to a certain extent until they were from his perspective. His perspective on the spicy scenes was almost disgusting sometimes and would put me off completely. There was a certain scene with a certain scrunchie that he apparently kept that grossed me out a lot and I thought was just outright disgusting. And unfortunately that sort of got worse as the book went along, because a running theme in these books is once the spice starts, it continues tenfold and it just builds and builds and builds and you lose the plot. This one especially lost the plot. So I'm reading a book about horse training and I'm really intrigued to see how they're training the horse, and they've got a new racehorse and they've got to train the racehorse. They've got a timeline to train it before this certain point where it goes on this run to get like registered, I guess. And I just wanted more. I wanted more of the horse training. Again, it's the sort of thing where a romance book says it's a cowboy romance, a horse training romance, that sort of thing. I just want more of it. I don't want it to be ignored and pushed to the side. And it was pushed to the side. I genuinely wanted to know how they trained that horse. But by the time we got to the end of the book, where the horse is doing the time trial sort of thing to make sure that it can go into more races. So it's like the starting thing that they do to get the horse into the races. And they got to that point and I just didn't care because I didn't have the build up of it. All of a sudden, this horse has gone from they're buying this yearling in a sale to all of a sudden this horse is the fastest horse on the track. I didn't get any context. And the horse training was happening at the start. Don't get me wrong. I was so excited at the start because I was getting elements of the horse training and her idea of horse training, and they're being impressed by what she's doing, and it got explained properly. But from someone who loves horses and knows a lot about horses, it didn't have enough of the horses to be what it promised it was going to be, especially once the spice started. I think honestly that's when the horse talk stopped. When the chemistry started between the characters and then the spice started, it was like a second thought after the spice, and I feel like it needed more horses, it needed more of the training, it needed more of everything in that sense that it just didn't have. I saw the third act conflicts coming from a mile away. So there were 3 specific things that were going to be the third act conflicts combined. Now, in one respect, one part of the third act conflict, I do not like how it was resolved. The main conflict at the end, I hate how it was resolved. I understand it for the context of her past relationship. I really do, completely. And I can't spoil what happens because that's a huge spoiler, especially because it's at the end. But the thing is, it wasn't approached well. And I was worried at the start when it got introduced that it wasn't approached well, the idea of infertility. And I don't like that it was just used as a means to an end, because infertility is a real problem with a lot of people. Like, a lot of people struggle with infertility worldwide. I just didn't like how it was approached, and I didn't like that it was brushed off as well, as if like it mattered to a certain extent, but then they brushed it off like it didn't matter at all, and like, oh, that must be what's happened, and oh my god, this must be what's happening now. And it was literally in a sentence it was brushed off, and I just wanted more of it, and I feel like it wasn't doing its best that it could have been with that element in it. And I honestly think that if you're not going to respect the possibility of that sort of thing happening, you need to do it well, because otherwise it's just going to offend but also hurt a lot of people. So basically what made this a 3.5 stars, this whole book, was the characters and how well they were thought out and developed and all of that. But there were elements that brought it down for me, obviously, like I just said. I've read 3 of the books in this series. So far, this is my least favourite in the whole series. But I have not read the last book because it's not been released yet. So take what I say with a grain of salt at the moment. But at the moment, it's my least favourite book. But I still enjoyed the characters, and I still enjoyed their journeys and their struggles and getting over those struggles and finding themselves. I just feel like a lot of this book at the end was brushed aside very quickly, and it needed more because you built it up so much through the whole book. You can't just brush it under the rug at the end of it. And I think a lot of the things in this book were sacrificed in place of putting more smut in the book that was unnecessary. So yeah, unfortunately, it was another book that fell to having too much spice for its own good and overpowering the plot, but it was still enjoyable for me to read to a certain extent. I just ended up starting to skip some of the spice chapters, that's all. And the last book I read in July is the 3rd book in the Silver Pine series, which is Riding the High by Paisley Hope. And I rated this book 4 stars. It was my favourite of the series so far. So this book follows a congressman's daughter and the town sheriff. And they've sort of been friends for years, but on a trip to Vegas, they spontaneously get drunk and get married. And it sort of sticks them in a bit of a problematic situation. So they end up deciding to keep it a secret for a little bit. And during that time, she moves in with them to help take care of his daughter. But the close proximity seems to make the sparks continue to fly. Now, I'm sorry, the lighting has gone down a lot. It's very rainy outside, so I don't have a lot of light to work with at the moment. So bear with me getting a little bit darker. Hopefully it comes back a little bit, we'll see. But coming back into this book, I quite enjoyed the change of pace from what I normally read in romance books. Having the friends to lovers was refreshing. It just was done really well as well. And it helped that I actually enjoyed the series of events coming up to the end of the book. Because even though it was a Vegas marriage, spontaneous, accidental marriage, it wasn't done in a cringy cliche way like they typically are. It was actually done well and it made sense. And the characters, if anything, it just made them open up to their feelings more and understand each other more. I love that their energies, even though they're opposite, with him being a single dad and trying to be in control of everything energy and her being chaotic free spirit, they matched each other so well that I honestly think it's more like soulmates finding each other than opposites attract. When I was reading the 2nd book in this series before this, the main male character kept calling her woman, and that's a bit of a trigger thing for me when you go, woman, do this, or woman, what are you doing to me? That's a little bit of a trigger thing for me. So the fact that the author made the decision to not have that in his actual book, I think was the best decision, because that would have actually made me hate this book a lot more if he constantly called her woman. Instead, his nickname was Vixen, which made sense in the context of a lot of things he was saying, and I did appreciate it and enjoy it a lot more because of that. I also enjoyed that the spice wasn't overpowering in this book. Yes, at once the spice starts, it sort of continues and keeps going. That's the typical theme for this. But I actually enjoyed the spice, and the spice was actually very much stuff that is realistic, and I honestly think the spice was pretty good. And I don't know whether that's just because the chemistry between the main characters was so much better than the other ones. Not that the other ones didn't have chemistry, but this type of chemistry was just so good, and I loved it so much that I think that it made the smut scenes a lot better and a lot more connected and not unnecessary. Like, they actually made sense to happen in those moments. Without spoiling anything about the previous books, I feel like each of these books has been a step up from the last when it comes to the relationships in the book. And I like that in the way that they're doing that, it's sort of making a different experience all along the way as we go along. So as much as there's toxic past relationships in every one of these books, they're all done in different ways, that it actually doesn't mean it's repeating itself. The first and second books in this series definitely seemed like they were more similar to each other, but in different contexts. But this third book, definitely being the best book of the series, did something so different. And I think it could have been because there was a child in the book. I don't typically enjoy a lot of single dad tropes, because a lot of the time they don't write the children the way a child should be written. They don't have any substance or character to this child. But in this book, Mabel, the child, had so much charisma that she actually made the book better. And she's made every one of the books in this series better, if I'm being honest. It's not like she's just there as he's a single dad. She's genuinely there as the pinnacle of the book. She is the center of this whole book. He doesn't do anything without knowing that she's okay with it. And the female character in this book gets along with her so well, and their character development together and them getting to know each other was honestly the best part of this book, aside from the relationship. I also appreciated that the characters from the other books weren't just thrown off to the side and ignored. It was genuinely like I was reading a continuation of a long story that started in the first book. It's just that we're from a different perspective. And I actually really appreciated that. It's not just like they're forgotten. Also, I appreciated that the ending of this book was wholesome and believable, and it made sense. And the only reason things weren't being told to people is because they were trying to solve problems on their own and trying to help the other person rather than worry them. And that sort of miscommunication is more wholesome to me, because they always work it out better in the end. And they're always like, hello, dummy, you should have told me the whole time, because I would have known exactly your solution. And I loved that the ending was like that, because it just made the book so much better. I don't know. I love this one so much better. I can see exactly who this writer is and what she wanted from this book. And I'm not going to be able to stop thinking about this for a long, long time. I think I've got to wait until November for the next book in the series to come out. I also don't know who the characters are in that book, because we've gone through all the siblings of the Ashbys. And I think it's following Ivy from the second book's sister. But I haven't seen her in any of the other books until now. It's just been mentioned in that last book that she's coming to visit. So I don't know why we've chosen that character, but I trust Paisley Hope at this point. I trust she's going to do it well. So let's hope that it does it well. I do know that the character that's coming into the fourth book is a pop star. So it'll be interesting to see that sort of trope play out. But yes, that is my thoughts on those books. So that is all the books that I read over June and July. Hopefully this video isn't too long. I did talk a lot, so we'll have to see. But I'm excited for August. It's like we're just starting August now when I'm filming this. So I don't even know what I'm going to be reading in August, and it's very exciting. I hope that you enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Until then, I hope you have a lovely rest of your month and a lovely rest of your year, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.